Okay, guys, welcome back to the channel. This is part 3 of a series I've been doing featuring a $1 million Aries Cerat system at Believe High Fidelity in Austin. Well, it's mostly Aries Cerat. If you watch part 1, it was an entire gear walkthrough by Joshua, who owns the home that I visited, as well as that dealership and the gear. Amazing system. Part 2 showed you the music clips and some of my anecdotal feedback. I put captions in that kind of help you. You know, YouTube clips are very limited in what you can glean, so I tried to give you a little bit of my feedback, as well as some of the raw footage. I kept the camera rolling after the song finished, each song finished, and it had some of my raw feedback I was giving Joshua real time. That's the kind of stuff I like to give you guys, is the raw footage, real time, quasi real time. But this video, what I wanted to do was give a better synopsis of what I heard, but more importantly, give you a couple of takeaways that are very important. I don't think is easily gleaned from part 1 and 2, but also will explain why certain subjective jargon and feedback is the way it is. It's not just about, it's very easy for people just to give subjective jargon and give their feedback and be so-called experts. And they are experts in their own taste, but this subjective jargon, if there's no basis, if you don't know what their in-room measurements are or what their taste profile is, or their in-ear measurements even better, then you don't really have a good gauge for how to place those their feedback to your own taste. Everybody, as I've proved with in-ear measurements with the box, hears differently. Everybody has different rooms. It's not just the gear we're reviewing, and that'll be part of my takeaway as well. Don't want to spoil that part, but this is very important, not just to get jargon, although we love to talk about audiophile jargon, but also get the reasons why. And so I want to explain that. But real quick, I have some housekeeping FYIs coming soon. Number 1, Mark Levinson sending me his Maria 800 amp. I can use that in my system. That will give me a better chance to isolate the one variable, one piece of equipment of Mark Levinson with all my other gear and give you more feedback on that that's valuable. Also, Stephanie, not Angela, Stephanie, who used to be on the channel a lot. I have a playlist. You can go look it up, catch up if you don't remember her. She used to be on the channel. She moved back to Houston from LA. She's going to be back on the channel soon. Maybe I'll pop up a few reminders of her. And also, the whole reason I stopped at Believe High Fidelity in Austin is that I was on my way to my Airbnb, which, if you've been following along, I'm building an Airbnb in Fredericksburg, Texas, not Virginia. And lots of people have been asking me, they mess up that I think it's Virginia. But it's also going to be catered to audiophiles. I'll be able to rent it to audiophiles and have systems in there that'll be almost like quasi in-home demos for a weekend of state-of-the-art gear set up perfectly, and then you get experience with that on top of all the fun stuff in Fredericksburg, which I've been sharing on Instagram. Follow me on that or the membership section. A lot of fun. Fredericksburg as just a destination, wine country, party town on the weekends. It's a lot of fun. But anyway, that's the FYI housekeeping stuff out of the way. Let's get back to my general synopsis of the Aries Cerat system, and let's stick to the jargon side that I know a lot of people like and my feedback. So in general, I could talk about soundstage breakdown, a bunch of different characteristics in that realm of it, but it's easier for me to just say this is one of the best systems I've visited as a whole, period. I don't know how I would rank it depending on certain metrics, but basically one metric that it excelled in that I think gets overlooked when people start talking audiophile jargon is goosebump factor. And when I play certain songs, I can get goosebumps. I know I get it, routinely with my system when I play these songs. And if I play those same songs in other systems or hear them at shows and don't get goosebumps, I can still appreciate things that system does good. But if I don't get that subliminal, uncontrollable feedback of goosebumps, I know that maybe something is not as good as I like it, because that's something you can't control. It's something that you can't placebo effect. It's something that your eyes can't as easily condition you to make you get goosebumps at certain parts in the song. There are other variables than just the gear and the room and all that, but what I've consistently heard and been impressed with Aries Cerat gear, and I've been lucky now to hear it in Sacramento, at Robert's home, at several shows in Expona, heard the Contendos in Munich. I've heard Aries Cerat a lot, and I've heard Aries Cerat gear with other speakers like Estalon Extremes. So I've had been privileged probably to hear as many as most anybody else in the world, different systems with Aries Cerat gear, and that's why I can give you this feedback, that it gives that consistent goosebump factor with its flavor that resonates with me. Now, it doesn't mean it's perfect. And I mean, even in the music clips, I mentioned that I thought Judith Owen's voice seemed a little chestier than I'm used to in my system. It didn't corrupt the performance in any way. And we're talking about maybe a few dB difference from what I'm used to here and there in the 100 to 300 hertz range. I don't know. I didn't do any measurements, but just what I know in general. And I wasn't at the recording to know either which one is right. But I'm just saying what stood out to me was that, yes, it's not perfect to my taste, but it's much closer to my taste than most any other system I go to, because of the goosebump factor, and also pivoting to one of my takeaways, which is the room. That made a huge difference in terms of resonating with me, because he listens near field. He had a room within a room created. I've got similar amounts of treatments, and I'm used to that kind of presentation. I like hearing the gear, not the room. And that's exactly what he was able to accomplish by creating this room. Now, before I get into the room in general, I do want to say two other things in general about Aries Cerat gear. Number one, for cost no object performance, as I mentioned with Mark Levinson, we've got Bugattis, Rolls-Royce, Lamborghinis, Ferraris. I talked about this. Depending on your taste and those kind of things, same thing happens in cost no object. You might like Mark Levinson, you might like MBL, you might like Aries Cerat. There's so many different options. But I think a lot of people in the cost no object, if they audition Aries Cerat and then visually look at it, it's going to resonate on tons of metrics that I think are hard to beat. Aesthetically, totally beautiful. I think those speakers are beautiful. I think the electronics and the chassis are beautiful, although I'm even more impressed with what's underneath the chassis inside. Stavros Danos, as a person in the hobby that I've met, he's probably, I'm not even hyperbole, thinking probably top 5 in terms of innovative, genius level guys pushing the hobby forward. And his new turntable is a more the feather in his cap that just confirmed my impressions of him ever since I met him and interviewed him. Check out my interview if you haven't. You'll really get an appreciation for why I say that. And I've met tons of people, okay? I'm not just throwing this around. I have a lot of confidence in who's behind it, the company behind it, the resources they have, but the aesthetic element, it meets a lot of these cost no object buyers, what they expect, both visually, outside, inside. You are going to have lots of tubes, but you're not having space heaters like a lot of systems with lots of tubes have. And that's a big drawback for me, especially in the South, having to run air condition all the time. As soon as you have to run the air condition, you're raising the noise floor in your room. So that's decreasing your signal to noise ratio right there. So space heater type systems, I'm not a big tube guy in general. But Aries Cerat does not turn your home into a sauna. So props to them on that. I do have some feedback in terms of, because I've heard Aries Cerat gear with Estalons, I've heard them with the Aurora and even the Contendo in Munich. I now have heard the Symphonia. And even though the Symphonia is definitely world class, would be, end game for most taste, if we're talking about pinnacle of performance, and if I had to nitpick, I can actually see why the Symphonia was discontinued and they came out with the Aurora. And the main area is in the bass. So if you have the Symphonia and you are thinking about going to the Aurora, I do think one advantage area would be in the bass, because the Symphonia has this single driver that loads the horn, a folded horn, and it's a little bit tougher for that type of speaker to mate to an environment. And also I felt that at some of the songs we were playing at max level, the excursion of that driver might have been getting closer to the max compared to if you have the Aurora. The Aurora has 4 huge drivers, almost like 4 subs. quasi open baffle in the back, but each driver has a back wave baffle. It's just brilliantly designed, time aligned with the rest of the drivers. Pretty much any speaker from a design element in the bass compared to the Aurora is going to fall short. So saying the Symphonia is a sacrifice to the Aurora is not, and almost any single box speaker is going to be inferior to that Aurora in my opinion in terms of its design and potential. And as well, it gives you some additional things with its outboard crossover and controls to make it even better that, again, most box speakers don't, and the Symphonia doesn't have. So putting a bow on my general wrap up of the brand in general, the system in general, the gear in general, that's where I wanted to give you my honest feedback for what it's worth. But getting back to the takeaways, the room, to me, pushed this experience to that next level because so many people have great gear. And I like to feature these rooms where people not only just have great gear, but it could be budget gear. But if they get the utmost performance out of it, that's what I'm looking for. Or the people behind it are impressive. Or the room that they put it in, or how they set it up, or designed it for their taste profile. These are the things that I look for, not just fancy, expensive gear. And in this case, what we had is pinnacle gear, but a pinnacle room. A room that was commensurate with that gear. Near field listening, room within a room. This was, without those room treatments, this was just a normal family room, open floor plan house. I don't know if many wife acceptance factor issues it would pass, but man, this is taking things to the neurotic level. Instead of changing the fuses in your thing, spending this money on this room treatment makes such a big difference. The reason being, guys, and you could see this if you go to the shows, you'll see all the manufacturers when they're setting up their speakers. They will be neurotic with their little laser distance measuring and their levels. They're going to be trying to get each speaker exact equidistant from the wall, the exact same to the distance, to the listening position, going neurotic to whatever their formula is. However, even that, which is good, I'm not knocking that at all, but even that is going to be primitive to what actually happens in the room. And we can prove this with Bach now in-ear measurements. Even when you've got everything set up meticulously distance-wise, it's still going to perform differently left and right to your ears because these laser levels, sound does not see your room like your eyes see your room. So even though the distances are the same to your eyes and to the laser pointer, this room might have a sliding glass door like he had in his room, or might have furniture or certain things, paintings on this wall. The other one may not. And in fact, in his room, he didn't have a full wall all the way extended. So these rooms, even if the distances are the same where you place the speakers from each side, they're not going to behave the same. My room, it's on the other side of the wall matters. In one case, I have bricks on one side of my wall, the other side of the drywall. In the other case, it's closet, hallway, and bathroom. When I put the in-ear measurements in, even though my speakers are equidistant and everything's measured perfectly, I get different left-right measurements. Sound sees this wall differently than that wall. What he did brilliantly is create a room within a room with super thick, not just 2-inch thick foams at the first reflection point, maybe something in the back, something in the front. No, he actually created a room within a room so that the sound coming from the speakers would behave symmetrically, and you are hearing more of the system and the gear versus the room. Those treatments are taking all the anomalies in the room and on the other side of the drywall out of the equation, and now you are truly able to hear the gear at its utmost potential. You cannot diminish the level of importance that has. And plus, near field listening, I was really enjoyed that because that's what I'm used to. That's kind of my flavor. Now, I do understand the flavor of people liking further back presentation, the huge scale, the huge distances, the added kind of fake reverb that a room can give you. And I have another room with Wisdom Adrenaline speakers where I can enjoy that type of treatment. And I don't have the Bach in there, so the reverb of the room kind of gives me those fake spatial cues that traditionally we have enjoyed, absent any other technology to the contrary. So I get that. But I think for this type of environment where you have a dealer, distributor type environment where he's trying to test the goods and actual equipment, he's got it set up where he's actually giving himself the best chance to evaluate differences in gear and taking the room out of the equation. And it paid off in spades if you get a chance to audition it, but hopefully through the music clips you enjoyed some of that as well. But there's a second takeaway too, and it's called synergy, that I don't think you can overlook. And I talked about this briefly with the Mark Levinson gear, that a lot of these cost no object brands like MBL, PBN that I've featured recently, Mark Levinson, and then Aries Cerat, that can do it all. You got to give these manufacturers props because the people behind them are brilliant enough to do it all. And when they can do all the synergy for you, that's a huge advantage. It doesn't mean 100% of the time, you can't get away with, mixing and matching. A lot of people can mix and match, and a lot of people do make just amplifiers that are great and can mate with almost any preamp, vice versa. But when you can get that synergy, all one designer, you get the brilliance of Stavros Danos, Aries Cerat doing everything, or Mark Levinson with Dick Berwin, the brains behind his all-in-one box, MBL, Jurgen, you got some of the best minds in the business taking care of everything for you. That's hard to beat, guys. And I do want to go off on a little tangent because it's going to parlay into my next video. I've been getting flooded for whatever reason with questions in my email about preamp. Do you need a preamp or you don't, or use a DAC with a preamp? And I'm going to have a separate video on that. But I want to tell you a story that still resonates with me about how important synergy is and how bad it can be, even if you have two great pieces. And it taught me a lesson that still resonates today. So I want to share this story with you. And it has to do with Parasound JC1 amps that were the bee's knees back in the day. Great amps still today. If you had them, you're probably getting still reference level performance. And then my friend also bought a Resolution Audio DAC with volume control. And in theory, they should have worked just fine together and eliminated the need for a preamp. Anything you can take out of the signal path is an advantage. You don't want to duplicate the same functions. So, but he did this, bought those two great pieces, certainly the bee's knees back in the day. And he's like, it didn't sound right. Can you come over and help? So I went over there, and sure enough, it sounded terrible. And I was like, but I noticed two things. And I said, hey, take that preamp that you're not using and let's put it in the signal path, about midway through if you've got enough cables. Because what I noticed, two things. I noticed that he had to, due to the way his room was set up, he had to put his Resolution Audio DAC preamp, all combined, way in the back corner, and his amps were near his speakers about 40 feet away. And he had to run all these RCA wires, all that length. On top of that length, I noticed he was using these cables that aren't that good with their capacitance, high capacitance cables, and the JC1s, although they had, normal parameters of acceptability for input impedance, it was on the low side. So driving 40-foot cables, high capacitance into somewhat unfriendly input impedance on the amp for that, certainly that long of a run. And I don't even know on the Resolution Audio DAC preamp if it had buffered outputs or any kind of ability to drive. Evidently it didn't, because that was too much for it. And then when he put in the preamp, obviously that alleviated the problem that was existing with that long run, broke it up, and then the preamp was able to provide both gain and drive that was amenable to his system, made everything sound better. Now, the knee-jerk primitive conclusion from that experience might be, oh, you always need to put a preamp in. And, this is kind of the question I've been getting in email, and that's very primitive, okay? What really happened there was an equation of synergy with regard to the capacitance of the cables, the length of the run, the input impedance of the amp. And I'm going to have a whole separate video to go into that tangent in a little more detail to help you guys out and give you the learning curve that I've learned over the years. But it parlays back into why I think Aries Cerat and this system sounds so great, is that you have a brilliant guy doing the design, and then you've got all the synergy taken care of with all the pieces. And again, most of the time you can get away with mixing and matching. Most pieces are made to be friendly as a whole, but why not get it perfect? If you're at that cost no object budget, try to get the perfect synergy and don't try to do it yourself. If you are going to do it yourself, then there's guys out there. You got to be self-aware. That example I just give you, did you have that experience and knowledge to be able to diagnose it? Or would you just put a preamp in there and then duplicate everything? You have to be able to have that self-awareness. If you don't, then get people that do know. And a guy like Rick Brown is a perfect example. I featured him with the $1 million acapella Spheron system, which despite mixing and matching a bunch of brands, it sounds like a perfect synergy because he knew how to mate those speakers with the burning amp and the SMC audio preamp and the Doma turntable and the cartridge. Everything fit not only together as an equipment, but also fit the taste that the owner was looking for. So you have to understand, both have some technical knowledge, experience, mating gear, if you don't trust one designer to do it all for you. So it's a macro takeaway that I think is very important from this system, other than just $1 million gear and sound. So hopefully you enjoyed. If so, sign up, subscribe. I got plenty more coming soon.